Here's a question that should genuinely unsettle you. If you walked into a psychiatric hospital right now and said one single sentence, would the doctors be able to tell whether you actually belonged there? In 1973, a group of perfectly sane people ran that exact test. And what happened next became one of the biggest scandals in the history of psychiatry, because it turns out the line between sick and healthy isn't nearly as solid as the professionals behind the desk want you to believe. And if you know exactly which words to say, you can walk straight through it. Today, we're looking at 3 different stories. Ordinary people who fake their way into a psychiatric diagnosis using a single sentence. A serial killer who ran circles around the country's top forensic psychologists. And patients who studied medical textbooks like scripture just to feel the particular kind of attention that only illness seems to bring. Because here's the uncomfortable truth this video is about to prove. The most dangerous person in a room full of experts is sometimes the one who already knows exactly what those experts are listening for. In 1973, psychologist David Rosenhan wanted to test something simple. Could psychiatric professionals actually tell the difference between sane and insane? He recruited 8 completely healthy people, a psychology grad student, a painter, a housewife, a psychiatrist among them, and sent them to psychiatric hospitals across the country. Each one was instructed to say exactly one thing during intake. They heard a voice saying the words empty, hollow, and thud. That was it. No other symptoms, no other lies. Every single one of them was admitted. And every single one of them was diagnosed, mostly with schizophrenia. Here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. The moment they were admitted, all 8 pseudo-patients stopped faking anything. They acted completely normal. They told staff the voices had disappeared. They behaved exactly as themselves, reading, writing notes, having ordinary conversations, and staff interpreted every single normal behavior through the lens of the diagnosis they'd already been given. Taking notes? Note-taking behavior, a symptom. Waiting outside the cafeteria before it opened because they were hungry? Documented as oral acquisitive behavior tied to their supposed pathology. The average hospital stay before release? 19 days. One patient stayed almost 2 months. And chillingly, actual real patients on the ward figured out these people were faking almost immediately. It was the trained professionals who couldn't see it. Once a label gets attached to a person, Rosenhan proved, everything about that person gets reinterpreted to fit it. And that single insight terrified an entire profession. Now, let's talk about someone far more dangerous than a research participant. Ted Bundy wasn't just a serial killer. He was, by nearly every account, one of the most effective manipulators forensic psychology has ever documented. And the terrifying part is how he did it, not through violence in the interview room, but through charm, intelligence, and a razor-sharp read of exactly what each psychologist wanted to hear. Bundy studied psychology himself. He worked at a suicide crisis hotline. He understood diagnostic criteria, clinical language, and the specific behavioral markers professionals were trained to look for. And he used every bit of it to shape how he was perceived. During his trials and evaluations, multiple experts described him as intelligent, articulate, even likable. Some genuinely struggled to reconcile the charismatic man in front of them with the brutal crimes on the record. Bundy would answer questions with just enough vulnerability to seem human, just enough confidence to seem credible, and just enough calculated detail to seem cooperative, all while giving away nothing that could genuinely incriminate him. He didn't beat the system through brute force. He beat it by understanding almost intuitively that professionals build conclusions from patterns, and he simply refused to give them the pattern they were looking for. But here's where this gets even stranger. Because not everyone who manipulates a diagnosis is doing it to hide something violent. Some people study illness itself, obsessively, meticulously, for a completely different reason. Not to escape suspicion, but to be seen. And the lengths some of them go to will genuinely shock you. Before we get into that, If manipulation and psychology like this is exactly the kind of thing you come here for, hit that subscribe button right now, because we cover a case like this every single week. And if the Rosenhan Experiment just made you question every hospital intake form you've ever filled out, drop a like. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to see it. Let's keep going. Munchausen Syndrome, clinically known as factitious disorder, describes people who deliberately fake, exaggerate, or even induce illness in themselves, not for money, not to avoid responsibility, for something psychologically deeper, the attention, care, and identity that comes specifically from being sick. These aren't casual liars. Some patients have been documented memorizing medical textbooks with the precision of a med student, learning exactly which symptoms trigger which tests, which lab results are hardest to fake and which are easiest. Some have injected themselves with substances to trigger real verifiable symptoms. Some have undergone dozens of unnecessary surgeries, chasing a diagnosis that was never physically there. The tragedy is that Munchausen patients often become excellent actors, not because they're cruel, but because the emotional reward is so powerful. For someone whose sense of being cared for is otherwise fragile or absent, the intense concern of doctors and nurses can become the closest thing to genuine connection they've ever experienced. The illness isn't the goal. It's the ticket to attention that nothing else in their life seems to provide. And here's the disturbing overlap with everything we've covered today. Just like Rosenhan's participants, and just like Bundy, these patients often succeed specifically because they understand the system better than the people running it. They know which symptoms sound credible. They know how professionals are trained to respond, and they use that knowledge as a tool. Here's what ties all three of these stories together. Diagnosis, at its core, relies on trust. Trust that the person describing their symptoms is describing them honestly. And when that trust gets weaponized, even the most experienced professionals in the world can be led exactly where the manipulator wants them to go. This isn't a reason to distrust psychiatry or the people doing the deeply important work of helping others. It's a reminder that the human mind, on both sides of that desk, is far more persuadable than we like to admit. If this changed the way you think about diagnosis, manipulation, or how easily perception can be shaped, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're breaking down a new mind-bending case like this every week. And drop a comment telling me which of these three stories disturbed you the most. I read every single one, and I want to know. See you in the next one.